This evening's Dharma talk is called Praising and Blaming, based on a suggestion or request of Jay Loshart. That's right, we changed his name, didn't we? So I think it's the same guy, though. Yeah. Sanho, let's see, Sanho, Mountain Phoenix. Isn't that his name? Yeah. How's that going for you, Mountain Phoenix? Thank you for reminding me. This topic of praising, this topic of blaming is all over the place. It's in every people, in every society has, who's at fault, who gets credit, who, which, what happened, how did this happen, who caused this. It's in some societies it's really intense. In some areas it's really over the top. Military is an area where it's just, in the court system, it's you did it or you didn't do it. If you did it, then this is what's going to happen to you. It's all cut and dried. There's no situational awareness going on there. This is very rare to have that happen. Only highly sophisticated, advanced societies or families or organizations have this kind of awareness that sees what the situation actually is, rather than jumping to a conclusion. Why do we jump to conclusions about praise and blame? I can tell you why we do that. Because we want a reference point. We want to know who's right, who's wrong, so that we can continue to function. This is very much a self-centered ego structure. And not wrong, we're not saying this is incorrect. I'm not here to say that necessarily, but I am here to encourage you to be, insofar as you're able to, be more and more aware about that whole dynamic rather than immediately jump into praising or blaming, whether it's you or someone else or a situation. Give it a little bit of time. I think there's a name for that. Patience, that's right, patience. The Sanskrit is kshanti, which doesn't mean waiting for something to happen. Just a kind of spaciousness that doesn't have particular expectations about anything. Something happens, fine. If it doesn't happen, fine. There is no demand. When there is a demand on anything, then we're right back to intense relative truth, which is, again, not wrong. We're not saying it's incorrect. We're just saying that very primitive situations, societies, organizations may tend to run on that kind of praise and blame, right and wrong, correct and incorrect. You did it right, you did it wrong. And of course this comes down to needing to control people, situations. And if we don't know, if we just give openness and respect to each individual, probably aren't going to be able to control them too much. So it's very interesting and very important to look at our motivation for what we're even doing in the first place. When we blame in our society, in our families, in our whatever milieu, social structure. It could be just your family, you and your dad, or you and your brother, and what's going on there, what's been going on since you were born. Might have started right in being that way. Who's right, who's wrong, who did this? Who did that? How many times have we... The one I always liked that my mother used to do is, now why did you do that? Like if you spill something, now why did you do that? It's like it's a difficult question it's so existential. The poor little 6-year-old is going, lack of balance, clumsy, all kinds of things could arise in that if they're really being genuine. If you're actually asking a question rather than being sarcastic or having a what is it called, a passive aggressive way of, whatever they call that, kind of striking out at somebody but pretending you're not doing that. Well, why did you do that? I love my mother. She was a far more helpful person to me than I realized when she was living. Looking back, good situation for me. I needed that kind of environment. Now, why did you do that? So that I would go, I turned into a 9-year-old existentialist philosopher. No one wanted to listen to me. Other than my friends, have you noticed how your friends are the people that give you a break no matter what? No matter how silly, how wound up in yourself, no matter what you say, no matter how confused, they always go, yeah, what's that like for you? Or is there any way I can help you? And you're just not making any sense at all. You're complaining about somebody, complaining about your family. They're all ears because they love you no matter what you do. They know you're nuts, but they're not about to tell you that because they're your friend. Interesting situation. So praising and blaming. I highly recommend that each person, especially if you have an ongoing awareness practice, it seems to be easier. When I say easier, I'm not saying actually easier. It could be harder, but it's more complete if you're extending the awareness of a situation out beyond your thinking process. Difficult to do that without really stretching that awareness. This is what we did here this evening when we did a half-hour session or so of shikantaza, or sitting meditation. Just precisely this. We just sit down, hold still, and we watch what's moving. What does that do? That stretches or expands or strengthens the observer part of your whole sensorium, your whole body-mind consciousness complex. The part that just sees, kind of the witnessing part of that. It makes it stronger and more, prioritizes it a little bit more. A little bit at a time, not very much. Takes a while. So this is not particularly about believing or disbelieving in anything. It's not about believing in Buddhism or disbelieving in Buddhism. Believing and disbelieving are artificial reference points that are only important to a self-centered person, an ego mind, a self-centered mind. And that comes in various sizes, very tiny up to pretty good sized. We all know a few of those. And I'm sure you could name one or two. We won't do that here. Unless we do. So the ancient teaching long before we got here is don't set up standards. You don't need standards. Don't set them up. In our lineage, which is Zen, Soto Zen, comes out of ancient China and ancient India, 2,500-year plus spiritual path, not a belief system. Buddhists don't particularly believe or disbelieve anything. Now, I'm not saying there aren't Buddhists that will claim they believe in Buddhism. Of course there are. There's millions of them. But a deeper understanding might be, what is this? Rather than jump to a conclusion or belief about what it is. Actually, keep an openness that has a sense of investigation about it. Let's find out what this fundamentally is. That's why we use a building like this, and it's called a monastery, where people, because they want to prioritize in their life something that's very, very important, which is, what is this? What does it mean to be a human being? We all know that we have jobs, we have families, children, we have all kinds of structures, and everybody in here is dealing with something different in their life. Even the people who live in the monastery as temple residents, even they have completely different dynamics going on. But the motivation seems to be, what is this? What is it? What is it to have emotions and feelings that pull you this way and pull you that way? What is it that have something happen and immediately have blame go out? Without even permission. It isn't like you try to blame. But we immediately, some people make it so easy for us because they're so obviously wrong. I mean, you don't have to even think about it. Well, that's wrong. And your friend next to you say, yeah, sure is. What a bunch of idiots. I mean, this kind of thing is, and it's not that there isn't some truth to it. Of course, it's relative truth. Here we are, apparent singularities, human beings, all breathing, all in the same room, all together, listening to an old man spout off about stuff. So it's not that there isn't something that this didn't cause that, or the person didn't hurt this person, or a person didn't say a bunch of things that are untrue, or another person didn't miss their appointments or let you down, or on and on. Of course those are going on. We're living beings, so we're going to run into all kinds of causes and conditions that are going to cause us to function in an apparently separated way from each other. That can be dealt with if you do two things: communicate and cooperate. Very simple. If people would just communicate with each other, which means you actually give the person the benefit of the doubt and you spend about 90% of the time listening to them. Now, if both people are trying to spend 90% of the time listening to each other, probably going to have a pretty clear conversation or communication dynamic happening, because there's always the tendency to, what do they have to say? What the other person has to say is way more important than what you have to say. You already know what you're going to say. That can't be important, but you have no idea what they're going to say. So shut up. Is that funny? What I'm saying is, when you're talking with someone, if they start to say something in the middle of your sentence, stop talking. Listen to them. Not easy to do that, especially when we have this kind of agenda about what we're saying is much more important than what they're saying. Or if they only knew what we were thinking, then everything would be, we would cooperate. This is just horse manure. I'm up here, I get to judge. I can do whatever I want up here. I'm going to do whatever I want for another, how does this get over? So what I'm suggesting, recommending that everybody do is to give everything, everybody, even people, even situations that are obviously wild and crazy or confused or aggressive or just flat out wrong from our perspective, give it a little bit of room. Give it some room. Don't take your eyes off from it. Because if you judge it, as soon as you judge that, this is what happens. They're wrong. They're whatever. As soon as then you stop investigating it. Whereas if you don't do that, if you let it, keep your eyes on it and look at it, you will eventually see through your awareness, or what is called in this tradition, your wisdom mind, which is completely invisible. If your wisdom mind is operating, you won't know it. If you think your wisdom mind is operating, this is called ego. You can't generate a wisdom mind. It's already the case, and it belongs to no one. This is what happens to individual egos, even very sincere, devoted people who are trying to very hard to be correct, be right, not to be on the side of right, to be helpful, to be sane, all the other fancy words that go along with it. Excuse me. You have to watch that, because it can very easily become convoluted. You can get wrapped up in your own judgment, your own thought system, your own elaboration about whatever's happening. As soon as you start elaborating, as soon as you start interpreting, everything starts to shut down. How do I know about it? I do it all the time. I couldn't know about it any other way than to know about it here, deeply. You have a question?
When you were talking about communication and cooperation, are you talking about verbal communication only?
All of it. We're always communicating. Our body language is the thing that's missed quite often. And it's not about body language deliberately saying something to someone, although that could happen. But just watching someone's body language will tell you, you'll sense on a level that's below the kind of conceptual thought process that goes on all the time. It's below that. It's more in the area, you could say, intuition about the person. And what I would say is, don't come to conclusions. This is what a conclusion looks like. It's anything that you know. Anytime you know something, you ignore everything else. The sage Nisargadatta Maharaj, who lived in India in the latter part of the last century, said, all knowledge is ignorance. So this doesn't mean that we can't know something or understand something or go down into something, but just bear in mind, if you can, that's not the bear kind of bear. But bear in mind that you're doing that, so therefore there's some kind of wings that are outside of your awareness field, because if you call on it, if you know about it, then this is called wisdom mind. It doesn't have a reference point. The more you do this, the more you practice this, the less you will know as an ego, and the more you will know as not being separate from anything. And when that happens, it's very clear to you, this caused that, and that caused this, and this caused that. But the blaming structure is not helpful. It's not helpful to go into blaming, even when it's obvious, because it just creates more warfare. Anytime you go do this, there's going to be one pointing back at you. At the same time, I'm not talking about everybody should be a pacifist, that everybody should just lay back and go the other direction. I'm saying stay in, if you don't push, you don't pull, and you don't shut down. Aggression, passion, ignorance. If you don't push on something, if you don't pull on it, when I say push, I'm saying judge it, get rid of it, condemn it, blame is another one. When you blame someone, you actually destroy the fundamental situation that is in front of you, that is there to tell you. If you open your body, mind, heart to whatever is there, it's communicating with you. So pay attention to everything. Everything is talking to you. There's a saying in the Buddha, the Buddha Dharma, a teaching that says that everything is preaching the Dharma all the time. You can't look anywhere and not see the Dharma coming towards you. And what is it saying? Not separate, not separate, not separate, not separate, not separate, not separate. All separations mean is not separate. The Sandokai that we chant in the mornings is Sandokai means the equality of sameness and difference. Was this Tozan Ryokai in the 9th century? I don't know, it was back there a long time in China. I didn't know the guy. But he wrote a sutra, a poem, and it's made into a chant that we do, because what he says in there is so important, the equality of sameness and difference. I think it was Sekito Kisen, right? Yeah. Sanho, that was Sanho, yes.
Speaking of Sanho, he has 2 questions.
Oh, it's about time. And it's about space, too.
His first question: I want to praise people. I want to tell them when they make me feel good. How can we do it without being self-centered?
Space. Take your time doing that. Take your time. Time and space. Take your time. Don't be too anxious to make sure that they know that you appreciate it. then it's more about you. It's a very interesting area that sometimes we have people who want to be really generous and helpful, which is not particularly generous and helpful because they're trying to be a person who's generous and helpful, which is very self-centered and not very generous and helpful. The person who is really generous and helpful is someone who is tuned into everything everyone is saying all the time. And if they're generous and helpful and they're in the middle of a sentence and you interrupt them, they will stop talking immediately and listen to you. Unless it's me, in which case I'll say, just a minute, let me finish my sentence. So it's about space, it's about time and space, which are basically concepts that point to an illusion. So give it some time. You could, it's like the old thing they do in the cartoons where there's somebody's really mad and they count to 10 so they don't blow up and kill the other duck. Remember that? I watched it over and over again. Further question?
His second question.
Yes.
If Robert and I both listen at 90%, I'm afraid he'll be underwhelmed. On a relative level, how do two people both listen without growing distant?
I think it's a matter of practice. And I wouldn't, don't worry about Robert. Robert's doing great. I know Robert really well. He's doing great. He's doing great. You don't have to worry about Robert.
He's in Saginaw. Sometimes in Austin, Texas.
Oh, they're separated by a vast amount of a big, huge gap. Yeah. Well, all gaps are the same. So, I know it's very meaningless, but. So, further questions? Chazan.
You were talking about situational awareness.
Yes.
And how can we see a situation without our thinking process?
That's a good question, and it's not a matter of eliminating the thinking process, but if the awareness is really strong, then you can see the thinking come up in the middle of it. It still could be just confusing or irritating. If someone could say or do something, and you could feel like, yeah, I don't like that. If I was, if I thought they'd pay attention to me, I'd criticize them, or you might talk to your friends. Look what they're doing. Look. No wonder their life is a mess. Look. It's all kinds of things. I'm just making up stuff here. But seeing your own thought process, if the awareness needs to include whatever is moving, and quite often our own thought process is judging everything. Praising and condemning and ignoring. Those are the three. We're either pushing on it, we're pulling out it, or we're shutting down. If you're not doing any of that, then you're just here. And you don't particularly have much of an agenda. Feels pretty good. Yeah.
Is situational awareness something we can practice?
The way you practice it is you sit down, you face the wall, and you watch, and you do it every day for whatever length of time you can. And you watch the way in which you keep shutting that out. That's how you practice it. It's like the way you practice it is by strengthening the awareness that you're doing it. If you try to stop doing it, then it's like ripping up a menu, so they won't fix strawberry shortcake. It's like it's the reverse. It's like trying to go in and work on that rather than actually see what it is. Watch the way it arises. Look at your own ignorance, your own aggression come out towards someone. Don't try to stop it. That's more aggression. And we get in a war with ourselves, and then we start condemning ourselves, possibly. Or then we might turn tail and go around and blame someone else. Or someone else might come along and say, no, you're not the problem here. They're the problem. And then we start listening to other people. Other people's ideas can be helpful the less they express them. More?
Could you say something about that? How other people's ideas may be more helpful the less they express them?
if a person, it comes back to something you've heard me say probably hundreds of times, if not thousands. Don't do anything unless you have to. So in other words, wait. It's another word. It's another description of patience. Just wait. If you want to do something, then change your body position. Put your hand on your knee over here. Maybe put your hands like this, or put both hands like this, or cock your head slightly. Or look up. Look down. And then possibly the other person would see that and say, well, what do you think about this? What do you think I should do? Or what do you think, how would you handle this? And then you could come back with, depending on what the whole thing is about, if you don't have to give them advice, don't give people advice. The lack of giving somebody advice actually causes, and if I may say it this way, just a description, it's not going to always happen, but causes that person, especially if you have a close connection with them and they're actually asking you, causes their awareness to sink down into that material in a way that may not have happened otherwise. They may have been skimming over the top of it, like a surfboard that doesn't know that there's 20 feet down, there's sand and shells, buried treasure. It's just another form of ignorance. More? There's good material there. You have to keep asking questions.
I find it difficult not to say something at times when I found something that you said or that I've practiced has been very helpful. How do you see that just because it was helpful for you doesn't mean you need to pass that on?
Don't teach. Don't teach unless you have to.
How do you not teach when you're in a situation where you are presented or propped up as a person who knows things?
Okay, well, ask is there some way I can help you? And then they'll say something like, well, what would you do? And then you could actually say, I don't know. That might be the most helpful thing you can say to somebody, because they already are projecting onto you that you're a teacher and that you're more aware than they are, and they have a lot of respect for you. And if you come back and say, I don't know what I would do in that situation, that might be the most helpful thing you could say. More?
I think about like when I go into AFR a couple times a
Yeah.
week and finding that middle ground between not saying anything and saying too much because
Yes.
I know something or I've heard something.
Yes.
And how, particularly when you're right in the midst of a situation where you're sitting in front of a group of people, how do you settle in or find or be aware of that middle ground between
Your body. Do it with your body. You just be aware of your body, and don't. In your situation there, you have to instruct because you're a meditation instructor. You teach meditation to people. So teach the meditation. And if it's in a rehab situation, then you already know how I prefer that we work with that. Use the 6 sense fields and actually go in and emphasize those sense fields, because that's what most people are ignoring, especially people who are in a difficult dynamic of having, as they said in the 50s, having a monkey on their back. And they're dealing with that. So the only access they might be able to get to their awareness is through the sense fields. So you would just instruct in that area, and then if a particular person starts to take you in another direction, then I just go really slow.
How do you have a willingness to fail? Because that's probably where I cover up the most, is if I feel like I'm not conveying what I need to, or it's not going how it should, I cover up maybe out of my insecurity.
So paraphrase your question. I understand.
How do you have a willingness to fail?
Keep an eye on your pride.
And how do you do that?
You know how to do it. You know where your pride's at. Just don't justify the pride. Don't put the pride. Don't push it down. Just awareness. Awareness is what's going to break into the seventh consciousness, where the pride, according to the Yogacara tradition, where the pride is located. There probably isn't any location, but some area where we have to show up a certain way, or we're somehow failing, and that can get very sophisticated for someone who is in an awareness practice. as long as you've been involved in this, and especially someone who's a monk who has an idea of their identity, of how you need to appear to others. I just think it's a matter of time. Just continue to look at it and dedicate yourself to helping people. Because if you really are dedicated to helping people and not about some kind of self-aggrandizement of being a really great teacher, then you'll see where people are at, and the failure comes of its own. You just realize you're a failure relative to being able to fundamentally change the suffering in the world. The only way it seems that we can really work with that is to see very deeply that we're not separate from all that suffering, and that's disappointing. It's disappointing that when we see that we aren't going to be able to function like a mountain when we're just a grain of sand. But if you realize that you're a grain of sand, if you realize that kind of relativity, then your awareness is very powerful. Then it's maybe not to you, but it's like a mountain to others, because they see that you're unshakable. You're shakeable. More?
Not yet, thank you.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
How can you help others without helping them?
Keep an eye on your own mind, on what's happening with your own consciousness. Any kind of going this way or shutting down, passion, aggression, and ignorance. Just watch that very subtle movement of the mind to go in as if someone is separate from you. There's nothing separate from anything. Everything is dependently arisen. The Buddha, when he awoke 2,500 years ago, was as far as we know, we weren't there, but as far as we know, what he saw is everything is dependently arisen. Everywhere he looked, he saw the Buddha. Everywhere he looked, he saw the very teaching that he was going to give. Everything is dependently arisen. There are no separate beings. Nothing comes from its own side as an individual self. It is completely and totally related to everything else that's appearing as phenomena. So if you're functioning in that way, then because you're functioning with the body mind is still here for a while, then whatever happens out here, it's choiceless. You just find yourself moving in this direction or not moving in this direction without a lot of heavy overriding thought patterns about it. It's called fearlessness, because if there's no fear of failure, because there's no desire for success. More?
Is not interfering helpful?
Fundamentally, that would be a practice. So that's a ground, path, and fruition. The ground is suffering. The path is awareness practice. And the fruition is seeing that nothing is separate, or a realization. And so the path part of it is hold back. It's called also called renunciation in the Buddhist tradition. Just hold back and allow things to develop. If you're needed, the reality itself will grab you by the jaw and pull you into whatever you need to be pulled into. But if you're busy promoting yourself and trying to make sure you're a good person and make sure you succeed, make sure of this, make sure of that, make sure people like you, that they think you're doing okay. If you're busy doing that, then it's not that you might not relatively do some help, be helpful. That could be happening too. So some of that is workable, but the fundamental situation, if you're going to transcend all of that, is to see what is fundamentally here all the time. You're not separate from anything. If you see that, you'll hold still. If you see that, you'll be silent. If you see that, you'll know when you should speak and when you shouldn't, when you should move and when you shouldn't. It's choiceless, and not many people are teaching that. And some of the people who are teaching would disagree with me, and I don't mind. They can do whatever they want to do. I'm not interested in having a lot of consensus. Yes.
Sanho from Austin, Texas has another question. He asks, I find myself blaming sighted teachers who give bad advice to blind kids. what does it look like to acknowledge something as unhelpful without adding on to that?
I would say wait for the opening. I understand that would be a difficult situation. I would say waiting, allowing some space before you bring it up. I think you could bring it up, but if you allow space before you bring it up, then the proverbial ducks line up. So more space in there. You have a really strong intellect, powerful ability to think and speak. And as you know, that's not a compliment, that's an observation. And I would say that in order for that to function relative to the issues that you're describing there, you need to wait, patience, kshanti. You need to wait and just have a willingness to not know. It's almost like you're on the verge of failing to do anything about it. And that's when there's enough space around it, which to ego, space is like failure. That way there's enough space around it that if it's necessary or appropriate or helpful, probably that is going to arise out of your vow to be with all things, save all beings. That's why we receive this vow, is so that we have some kind of a structure in our sensorium, in our awareness, that sees that we need to really be at service. As Bob Dylan once said, you're going to have to serve somebody. He probably sang that, should have said it. Do you have some time further, Bailey?
You just said to ego, space is like failure.
Yes.
That one.
Well, it is, what am I going to do? It's like, I don't know what to do next. It's like not knowing. To the one who has realized everything is space, there isn't anything but space. It's called emptiness. So everything is empty of what you think it is. If everything is empty, then nothing is threatened. Isn't that nice? But you actually have to see it yourself. There's books everywhere. The Heart Sutra, we can chant that over and over again. We can say, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. The same is true of feeling, perception, concept, or memory and consciousness. We can think about that. We can contemplate it. We can read commentaries on it that go into our conceptual mind and kind of stretch it out for us so we can get some kind of understanding. But where the teaching actually is, when you're ready for it, after you've looked at the wall for a few years, it's right in front of you. It's always right in front of you. Everything is preaching the Dharma. Everything is saying empty, empty, empty. Not absent. That's relative emptiness. We're not saying it's here and then now it's not here. We're saying empty, empty, empty. And we're saying empty, empty, empty. Everything is empty of what you think it is. It's called a preconception or parikalpita, which you've studied. More?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Questions, please. Yes.
If everything is empty of what we think it is, how is it possible to see what something really is?
You couldn't see it if it wasn't empty.
What?
I know. That's it. It isn't something else. It's that. So even emptiness is empty of its emptiness. So it's you can't find the beginning or end of anything. When that occurs, then you're liberated. When you're liberated, you're free. You're free to feel good. You're free to feel bad. You're free to suffer. You're free to be confused. You're free to vote Republican. What? You're really free to function in whatever the space that is arising, and that will not follow anybody's track. You won't pattern yourself after anyone. I often say, and I'm saying now, I have two really powerful teachers, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, the Dorje Dradal of Mukpo, and Kobun Chino Roshi was my Zen master. Totally different. They weren't anything alike at all. Their teaching style, everything about them. I think they probably didn't even like each other, even though I've seen them laughing together or joking together about something. I think Trungpa was joking and Kobun just didn't want him to feel bad, so he laughed. But I'm not like either one of those guys. Nothing at all. Yes. Yes. Senshu.
You were talking about waiting.
Yes.
Say there's some action that you feel needs to be taken, and waiting until.
Ask it.
I guess in waiting, for me, panic comes up.
So remember what I said. You're not waiting for something else. Patience isn't waiting for something else. That's like, you mean like in the doctor's office. Not that. Waiting is just this. Nothing's going to occur.
So
More.
How do we work with the relative understanding of waiting? Because it seems whenever I think of waiting, it's for something.
Mm-hmm. Well, just be there and notice the space that you're sitting in. You have you're sitting on the floor. Your hands are clasped like so. You're just here. It's just this. There isn't anything else but this. And that doesn't take away that you have somebody's coming to pick you up and they're 20 minutes late. But look at that situation and look at the structure of that situation as you wait. It's just a structure. You're not really separate for what you're waiting for. That's why there's really no waiting. Whatever's happening is exactly what needs to happen. It's like I often say, when you sit down, look at the wall, whatever arises in your mind is a cat. Yeah, something like that. Whatever rises is yelling because it's not happy. Was it a cat? Bobcat? So I think maybe that would be what you could reflect on a little bit is notice when that's happening and notice the panic that kind of comes up around it, which you seem to be indicating that some kind of nervousness or anxiety around something's not happening, it needs to happen. Maybe, you being a counselor, maybe someone's late or not coming in and you're kind of, as they say, what is that, twiddling your thumbs? Yeah. So kind of waiting for something to happen is look at that, look at the space in which that is happening. Look at the dissatisfaction that's happening about that. Just look at it. Don't add anything on like they should be on time. Why aren't they on time? Anytime you say why, your mind just starts to go in circles. The best question you can ask is what? What is this? Anxiety is coming up. What is that? So that you can actually go down, because you won't, if you're asking it directly and right on it, you probably won't get an answer. That's why ego doesn't want to do that. It wants to ask why questions so it can go in circles and feel like it's somebody having a problem. Why? Because. Why? Because. Well, why is that? Because of that. Well, why did this happen? Because they did it. Because who did it? Because they did it. Well, how about what happened to them? Well, yeah, it was them too. A whole bunch of people joined in and made life miserable for you. Yes?
Sanho has another question.
Great. Better be an easy one.
He says, you say, whatever is happening is exactly what needs to happen.
I do.
Can you say more about that?
There's different ways of doing it, but the way I would say it right now is if you're a meditator, if you're practicing stretching your awareness, this probably applies to anyone at any time. But if you're, it's a little bit more maybe creative or on the point or on the dot. If you sit down, hold still, whatever's arising in your mind as a meditator, whatever you're witnessing, even if it's panic is happening or antsiness or nervousness, then that's exactly what you need to see, because your particular dynamic, your body, speech, mind, the conditioning, you've been taught from the time you were born, anything that's happened to you in past lifetimes, which I'm not here to promote past lifetimes, but I'm also not here to dissociate this Dharma talk from that idea, because something's definitely happening before you got here, or you wouldn't be here. I'm not saying it's a self. I'm not saying it's an identity. Something's happening, and some of you have had really intense experiences around that. Others haven't, so not here to prove anything. But when you sit down, hold still, reflect on it. You're sitting here, you hold still. And it doesn't make, it makes some difference if you're sighted or not, but we have so many sense fields, and whatever's coming in is coming in through whatever sense fields are operating. So you're sitting down. And if everything is just on receive, then whatever's coming in will be not only what's coming in, but it'll be the misunderstanding of what's coming in. Something else will jump on, the idea, the interpretation about what's going on. And then there'll be some kind of a judgment about the interpretation, like I shouldn't be judging. So you're going to see the whole three-ring circus happening. And what I'm saying here, I'm highly recommending to you, if you have ears to hear this, don't do anything. Hold very still and just watch what occurs. And you will notice over time that what occurs becomes less and less and less. And it changes its dynamics so that it becomes more and more and more direct. It's just that. Just that. So when I say just that, what happens for one person, what happens for another person is going to be completely different kinds of things. Huh? Is it Dory? Dory, the pit bull, next door is squealing. And she's deaf, so she can't hear her own squeals.
Or anybody else's.
That's an interesting dynamic to deal with. Further questions? We're at 9 o'clock. Yes, go ahead.
One last one. I'm not sure who it's from, but the question is, what is the difference between consciousness and awareness? I am confused by these words sometimes.
So different ways of using it, and you can read books on it that will say just the opposite of what I'm about to say, but they're just concepts. So the way I use consciousness is anything that is an open space. It's like space, like this inside of this room is like consciousness. The objects in the room are in the consciousness. So it's just a way of talking about it. Like the way I would say this is, there's a consciousness in your stomach that is digesting your food. There's a consciousness that is controlling your blood sugar. There's a consciousness that's controlling your heartbeat. There's this whole matrix of nerve endings, and everything is all synchronized together and is working together. And the other way I talk about this, I say that if your awareness part of the consciousness, which is the part that actually knows there's something else, knows there's a room, knows there's a person, knows there's something other, apparent other, then self-centeredness grasps onto that otherness and thinks it's proof that it is an individual and something else is another individual. It's called duality, and this is if this seen in its extreme, it's called warfare. Whole countries will go to war if they have a really crazy, insane person at the head doing that. So just the way I talk about it, consciousness is just the whole situation, not only the body, but the consciousness in a tree that so a tree knows how to grow. It knows what its roots are. It doesn't know it in terms of concepts. There's just a knowing that is all through the whole thing. It's quite miraculous, I would think, being a biologist or being someone who is an astronomer or someone who's looking very, very close at anything. A particle physicist, that's got to be an astonishing thing for a very pragmatic, practical person, for him or her or them to go down into material on a very fundamental, bring the consciousness down into an area that's functioning just fine without your help. And we're going down into there, and then we start fiddling with it like they did. This is where the nuclear fission came from. They go down and they start fiddling around with things. They have no idea what the causes and conditions are, but they have a rough idea. I think this will blow everything up if we do this, so let's do this. Of course, that's what they do, and everybody seems to be itching to do that again. Then the awareness part is the part that seems to, for lack of a better word, is more the focused part. It's what you're receiving through your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind, your sensorium, everything that is coming in. So I highly recommend, in order to function in concert with the rest of this incredible world, this phenomenal world that we're in that extends into infinity, put all of your senses on receive. Your mind, just receive. When thoughts come into your mind, I don't care if they're the most horrible, evil, terrible thing you can think of. Just let it come and go. Do nothing with it. Because if you start doing something with it, then you're buying into that situation. And that can just as easily take you into further confusions. It's called the hell realm. Or it can take you into all kinds of other different realms that end up taking us in circles and circles and circles. So the focus part, sit down, look at what moves in any of the senses. This is the awareness part. Strengthen the observer part of this sensorium. It's not going to go very far. It doesn't need to. Once you see what this is, the search is over. Further questions? Wonderful.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of our red chant books. Again, would like to remind everybody about the all day that we have this Saturday, the last Saturday of every month. Please join us if you can. And also would like to remind everybody about the donation boxes in the hallway. We have special blue envelopes for the teacher, and then a box for here at Sokukoji. If you value these teachings, please help us as you are able, or online.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-ho-san, shi-shi-hu, shi-son-gu-sa, mo-gu-sa, mo-ko-ho-ja-ho-ro-mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.